I stood there on the cracked stoop of my Brooklyn apartment, the tray of golden homemade pastries sweating in the July heat, and watched my own daughter swallow her glance and walk right past me, without a word. 30 wealthy households had received my baking that week, each pie and batch of cookies crafted from tired hands and aching hope, yet she, the one I'd sacrificed everything for, barely noticed my existence. The weight of that moment still crushes my chest when I think about it. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and at 72 years old, I've learned that sometimes the people we love most can make us feel the smallest. I've lived in the same rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn Heights for 43 years. The walls are painted a pale yellow that's faded to the color of old bones, and the linoleum floor creaks under my feet every morning when I shuffle to the kitchen. But this place, with its chipped countertops and leaky faucet, has been my sanctuary and my prison all at once. Every morning, I wake before dawn. The city sounds seep through my cracked window, the rumble of the subway 3 blocks away, distant sirens wailing like wounded animals, the occasional shout from someone stumbling home from the night before. It's a soundtrack for what feels like an endless routine. By 4:30, I'm standing in my tiny kitchen, flour dusting my weathered hands, measuring ingredients by memory rather than sight. My glasses sit crooked on my nose, held together with medical tape that's yellowed with age. I sift flour through the same metal strainer my mother gave me 50 years ago, feeling each grain slip between the wire mesh like tiny prayers. I knead dough until my arthritic fingers scream, and I set my oven's temperature with trembling hands as my body aches from years of wear and labor. The warmth from the oven is my companion, my comfort, my reason to keep going when everything else feels cold and empty. This ritual has been my lifeline, my desperate hope to reach the family that left me behind emotionally years ago, even though they've never moved more than 20 minutes away. I bake because I don't know how else to show love. I bake because maybe, just maybe, if I make their favorites, my daughter Sarah's beloved lemon bars, my son Michael's chocolate chip cookies that he used to devour as a child, they'll remember that I'm still here. Still their mother. Still worth something. But that day in July, when I stood outside that limestone townhouse on East 78th Street, holding a tray of Sarah's favorite pastries, waiting for her to emerge from her friend's baby shower, I realized how foolish I'd become. I had imagined her surprise, maybe even gratitude. Instead, I felt invisible, like I was standing behind glass while life happened around me. The humid air pressed against my face like a wet towel. My floral dress, one of only 3 good ones I own, stuck to my back with perspiration. I'd spent $6 on the subway to get there, money I could barely spare, but I thought it would be worth it to see Sarah smile. To have her introduce me to her friends. To feel like I belonged somewhere in her gleaming world. When she finally emerged from that pristine building, surrounded by women in designer dresses carrying expensive purses, I lifted my hand to wave. My heart hammered against my ribs. But she looked right through me. Her eyes swept over me like I was part of the architecture, another fixture of the street that didn't deserve acknowledgement. She laughed at something one of her friends said, tossed her perfectly styled hair, and climbed into a taxi without ever meeting my gaze. I stood there for 20 minutes after she left, holding that tray, feeling the heat of betrayal and humiliation wash over me like the sticky July air. An elderly man walking his tiny dog asked if I was all right. I nodded and lied, the way I've been lying to myself for years. The pastries were getting stale in the heat, and I knew they'd go in the trash when I got home. Just like so many gestures before them. Let me take you back, because this story didn't begin with that moment on the sidewalk. It began 30 years earlier, when my husband Robert died of a heart attack at 58, leaving me with 2 teenagers and a mountain of medical bills that felt insurmountable. Robert had been the dreamer, the one who believed everything would work out. I was the practical one, the worrier, the one who lay awake at night calculating how we'd pay for groceries and rent and Sarah's violin lessons. When he died, I became both parents overnight. I worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices in Manhattan during the day, stocking shelves at a grocery store on weekends, and taking in sewing from neighbors whenever I could. My hands were always cracked and bleeding from the harsh cleaning chemicals, but I told myself it was temporary. Just until the kids finished school. Just until they could stand on their own feet. I gave everything to them, every penny I earned from my cleaning jobs, every sleepless night nursing colds and broken hearts, every meal I missed so they could eat. When Sarah wanted to go to private school, I cleaned an extra building every night for 2 years to pay the tuition. When Michael needed dental work, I sold my wedding ring to cover the costs. When they wanted smartphones and laptops and designer sneakers, I worked overtime and told them we were doing fine, even when I was surviving on peanut butter sandwiches and instant coffee. I remember the warm smell of vanilla that always filled my kitchen in those days, mixing with the aroma of whatever dinner I was preparing. There was a faded photograph of Robert hugging Sarah when she was 7, both of them grinning at the camera, that I kept on my refrigerator like a shrine. Every time I looked at it, I whispered the same promise to myself: one day, they will see what you've done for them. One day, they will understand. But as the years passed, my sacrifices seemed to mean less and less. Sarah graduated valedictorian and got a full scholarship to Columbia. Instead of gratitude, she became distant, almost embarrassed by me. "Mom, why are you always here?" she snapped one evening when I showed up to her college apartment with homemade soup during finals week. The words cut through my hope like a winter wind cutting through my thin coat. "I'm just trying to help," I whispered, holding the warm container against my chest like armor. She rolled her eyes. "I can take care of myself. You don't need to baby me anymore." But I did need to. Taking care of them was all I knew how to do. It was my identity, my purpose, my proof that I mattered in a world that otherwise seemed to have forgotten my existence. Michael was different but no less painful. He accepted my help with a smile and a hug, then disappeared for weeks without calling. He'd show up when he needed money or when his girlfriend kicked him out, eating my food and sleeping on my couch like it was a hotel. "You're the best, Mom," he'd say, kissing my forehead before vanishing again into his own life. The pattern continued after Sarah graduated and got a job at a prestigious marketing firm. She moved to a studio apartment in Chelsea that cost more per month than I made in 3 months. When I offered to help with furniture or groceries, she'd accept with the enthusiasm of someone receiving a parking ticket. "Thanks, Mom," she'd say, barely looking up from her phone. I started to notice how she introduced me to people. "This is my mother," she'd say, the words flat and perfunctory. Never, "This is Eleanor, my mom who worked 3 jobs to put me through school," or, "This is my mother who makes the best lasagna in Brooklyn." Just my mother, like I was a biological fact rather than a person. The microaggressions piled up like snow, each one small and seemingly harmless, but together they created an avalanche that buried my self-worth. Birthday cards I sent were left unopened on their kitchen counters. When I got pneumonia 2 winters ago and called to let them know I was in the hospital, Sarah said she was super busy with work and Michael promised to visit but never showed. I spent 4 days in that sterile room, watching other patients receive flowers and visitors, while my phone remained silent. Last Christmas was the breaking point I didn't recognize at the time. I had saved for months to buy thoughtful gifts, a cashmere scarf for Sarah from a department store where I'd never shopped before, and a nice watch for Michael that I'd seen him admire in a catalog. I wrapped them carefully in paper I'd bought on sale, adding ribbons and bows like I used to when they were children. Christmas morning came and went with no call. I waited until evening, then decided to surprise them with a visit. I'd made a chocolate cake, Robert's favorite recipe that both kids had always loved, and I carried it carefully on the subway to Sarah's apartment. When she opened the door, she looked annoyed. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "We're having people over." Behind her, I could see her living room filled with friends, all young and beautiful and laughing over expensive wine. The cake suddenly felt heavy in my hands, homemade and humble and completely out of place. "I just wanted to bring you this," I said. "For Christmas." "We already had dessert," she said, but she took the cake anyway, setting it on a side table like it was contaminated. "Thanks. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" She didn't call tomorrow. Or the next day. Or the day after that. But the real devastating blow came on a cold afternoon in March. I was cleaning Sarah's apartment, something I did once a month as a way to help and to feel needed, when her phone buzzed with a text message. She was in the shower, and the phone was sitting on the kitchen counter next to me. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the message preview showed on the screen. It was from her friend Jessica. "How was the family dinner? Did your mom do her usual guilt trip thing?" Sarah's response appeared moments later. "OMG, yes. She brought yet another homemade pie and acted like it was some huge sacrifice. So embarrassing. I swear she has some kind of kitchen obsession." Jessica replied, "At least she's useful, I guess? Free cleaning service LOL." My hand stopped moving. The dust rag fell from my fingers. I stared at that phone screen until the messages disappeared, but the words were burned into my memory forever. Kitchen obsession. Useful. Free cleaning service. I walked to the bathroom door and heard Sarah humming in the shower, completely unaware that she had just destroyed something fundamental inside me. I gathered my cleaning supplies in slow motion, my entire body feeling disconnected from reality. When Sarah emerged 20 minutes later, I was sitting on her couch, staring at my hands. "All done, Mom?" she asked cheerfully, toweling her hair. "Yes," I said. "All done." I left her apartment and walked 17 blocks home in the rain. By the time I reached my building, I was soaked through, but I barely felt the cold. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment. The elevator had been broken for 6 months, and sat on my kitchen floor. The same kitchen where I'd spent countless hours baking for them, worrying about them, planning for their happiness. I don't remember reaching for the mug of tea I'd left on the counter that morning. I only remember the sound it made when it slipped from my trembling hands, a sharp crack that echoed through the small space. The ceramic pieces scattered across the linoleum like the fragments of my heart, and the tea spread in a brown stain that seeped into the cracks between the tiles. I sat in that puddle of cold tea and china shards and cried. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the raw, choking sobs of someone who has just realized they've been living a lie. For 30 years, I had told myself that my sacrifices mattered. That my love was valued. That I was building something meaningful with my children that would sustain us all. But usefulness isn't love. Free cleaning service isn't family. And kitchen obsession isn't the same as a mother's devotion. The thought of saying no to them flickered in my mind like a candle in a drafty room. It was a dangerous thought, rebellious and terrifying. What would happen if I stopped being useful? Would they disappear entirely? The fear of loneliness crept up my spine like cold fingers, but for the first time, I wondered if I was already lonely. If being ignored and taken for granted was actually worse than being alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table and looked through old photo albums, trying to find evidence that I was wrong. Pictures of birthday parties I'd planned, Christmas mornings I'd orchestrated, graduations where I'd beamed with pride in the audience. But even in the photos, there was a distance. Sarah and Michael smiling for the camera, but their eyes already looking somewhere else. Already growing away from me. I was packing those albums into a box when I caught sight of myself in the black window, my reflection ghost-like against the city lights. The woman staring back at me looked exhausted, defeated, invisible even to herself. When had I become so small? When had I learned to apologize for taking up space in my own children's lives? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever wondered if your love was just a transaction to the people who should cherish you most? I hope not. But if you have, you know the particular ache of realizing you've been giving pieces of yourself to people who see you as a convenience rather than a person. The next few weeks passed in a haze of routine that felt more hollow than usual. I still cleaned apartments, still baked, still paid my bills and watched the news and pretended everything was normal. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. I found myself studying other people on the subway, wondering about their lives. The elderly man who always sat in the third car, reading the same newspaper. The young mother with twin strollers who looked like she hadn't slept in months. Did they feel valued? Did their families see them? It was during one of these subway rides that I met Maria Gonzalez. She was sitting across from me, a woman about my age with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She was knitting something blue and soft, her fingers moving with practiced precision. When she noticed me watching, she smiled. "It's for my great-nephew," she said, holding up her work. "His first baby blanket." "It's beautiful," I replied, and meant it. "Do you have grandchildren?" she asked. The question hit me like a physical blow. "No," I said. "My children, they're not married yet." It was technically true, but we both knew there was more to the story. Maria's eyes were kind but knowing, and she didn't push. We rode in comfortable silence until she got off at my stop. "I live in the brick building on the corner," she said as we climbed the subway stairs together. "For B, if you ever want to talk, I'm usually home in the evenings." I thanked her and thought about her offer for days. There was something about Maria that reminded me of the person I used to be before I became so small. She seemed solid, grounded, sure of her place in the world in a way I had forgotten how to be. 2 weeks after the tea mug incident, Sarah called. Not to check on me, but to ask if I could watch her friend's cat for a weekend. No greeting, no "how are you," just the assumption that I would be available and willing. "I can't," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "What? Why not?" I scrambled for a reason. "I have plans." "Plans?" She sounded genuinely shocked, like the concept of me having plans was incomprehensible. "What kind of plans?" "Just plans," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I'm busy that weekend." There was a long pause. "Okay. I guess I'll ask Mom to find someone else." The call ended and I sat staring at my phone, amazed by my own boldness. I had said no. It was a small thing, but it felt enormous. The next time Michael called asking for money, which happened like clockwork every 3 weeks, I hesitated before answering. He launched into his usual story about unexpected expenses and promising to pay me back, but for the first time, I really listened to the words. Not the content, but the tone. The casual assumption that I would say yes. The lack of real gratitude. The way he spoke to me like I was a bank rather than his mother. "Mom? You still there?" "I'm here," I said. "But I can't help you this time." "What do you mean you can't help?" His voice sharpened with surprise and, underneath it, irritation. "I mean I don't have the money to spare right now." It was true. My savings account, which had never been large, had dwindled to almost nothing from years of floating them through various crises. But even if I'd had the money, something inside me had shifted. I was tired of being an ATM machine with maternal feelings. "Come on, Mom. It's just $200. You always help me out." "Not this time," I said, and my voice was steadier than I felt. The argument that followed was ugly. Michael accused me of being selfish, of changing, of not caring about him anymore. He hung up without saying goodbye, and I knew he expected me to call back within an hour, apologizing and offering the money along with my apology. I didn't call back. Instead, I took the subway to visit Maria in 4B. She answered the door in a flowered apron, and her apartment smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Unlike my sparse, tired-looking space, her home was warm and lived in, with photographs covering every surface and plants thriving in every window. "I was just making dinner," she said. "Would you like some?" We ate her homemade tamales and talked. Not about my problems at first, but about small things, the weather, the neighborhood, her great-nephew who was due any day. She asked about my baking, and when I told her about the business I'd been dreaming of starting for years, her eyes lit up. "Why don't you do it?" she asked. "Oh, I couldn't. I'm too old, and I don't have the money, and my children need—" "What do your children need?" she interrupted gently. I opened my mouth to give my usual answer about college loans and rent and emergencies, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, Sarah was making more money than I'd ever dreamed of, and Michael was 31 years old. What they needed wasn't my money. It was to learn that I wasn't an endless resource to be tapped whenever convenient. "I don't know," I admitted. Maria poured me another cup of coffee and waited. And slowly, carefully, I told her everything. About the text messages. About being ignored at the baby shower. About 30 years of feeling like I was buying love with services and never quite succeeding. She listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor," she said finally, "when was the last time one of your children asked how you were feeling?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "I don't remember." "When was the last time they thanked you for something?" Again, I couldn't remember a specific instance. "They said thanks sometimes, but it was automatic, meaningless, the way you thank a cashier." "And when was the last time you did something just for yourself?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I realized I couldn't answer that one either. That night, I walked home through the familiar streets of Brooklyn Heights, but everything looked different. The same brownstones and corner stores and busy intersections, but I was seeing them with new eyes. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about what Sarah and Michael needed or wanted or expected from me. I was thinking about what I needed. I needed to feel valued. I needed to have real conversations instead of transactional interactions. I needed to remember what it felt like to matter to someone, not for what I could provide, but for who I was. The next morning, I woke up before dawn as usual, but instead of starting my baking routine, I made myself a proper breakfast. Scrambled eggs with cheese, toast with real butter, coffee that wasn't instant. I sat at my small table and ate slowly, savoring each bite instead of rushing through the meal so I could get to work. Then I called the office cleaning company where I'd worked for 15 years and gave my notice. My supervisor was surprised. I'd never missed a day, never complained, never caused problems. But I was 72 years old, and my back ached every morning from scrubbing floors. It was time. With my newfound free time, I enrolled in a small business course at the community college. The instructor was younger than Sarah, but she treated me with respect, like my ideas and opinions mattered. For the first time in years, I felt intellectually challenged and engaged. I started baking again, but differently. Instead of making Sarah's favorites or Michael's childhood comfort foods, I experimented with recipes I'd always wanted to try. Lavender shortbread. Chocolate tarts with sea salt. Sourdough bread that took days to develop properly. The woman at the farmer's market booth next to mine, I'd started selling my baked goods there on Saturdays, told me my croissants were the best she'd ever tasted. A young mother bought a dozen of my sugar cookies and said her daughter wouldn't stop talking about them. These were strangers, people who didn't know about my failed marriage or my disappointed children, and they appreciated what I created. It felt revolutionary. But my newfound independence didn't go unnoticed. Sarah called 3 weeks after I'd started my new routine, her voice tight with annoyance. "Mom, what's going on?" "Mrs. Patterson said she saw you selling cookies at the farmer's market instead of cleaning her apartment on Thursday. I don't clean apartments anymore, I said. Since when? Since I decided to try something different. But what about the money? You need that job. What struck me wasn't her concern for my financial well-being, it was the assumption that I couldn't possibly know what was best for myself. That I needed to be managed and directed and saved from my own poor judgment. I'm managing fine, I said. Mom, this is crazy. You can't just quit your job to play around with baking. What if something happens? What if you get sick? You don't have savings. She was right about the savings, but wrong about everything else. For the first time in my adult life, I was taking care of myself proactively instead of waiting for disaster to strike. I appreciate your concern, I said, but this is my decision. Your decision, she repeated, like the words didn't make sense. Michael's reaction was more direct. He showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Tuesday evening, using the key I'd given him years earlier. I was kneading bread dough when I heard my front door open. Mom, he called. In the kitchen, I replied, not stopping my work. He appeared in the doorway, hands in his pockets, wearing the expression he used when he wanted money but was trying to work up to asking. Sarah told me you quit your job, he said. That's right. Why would you do that? Those people are going to be really upset. You've been cleaning for them for years. I shaped the dough into a loaf and placed it in a buttered pan. They'll find someone else. But Mom, you need to think about this rationally. You're not getting any younger. You need steady income. This baking thing is fine as a hobby, but it's not a hobby, I interrupted. It's a business. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of laugh you give a child who announces they want to be a dinosaur when they grow up. Come on, Mom. Be realistic. You can't support yourself selling cookies. Why not? The question seemed to surprise him. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Because you're 72. Because you don't know anything about running a business. Because it's risky. So was raising 2 children on my own after your father died, I said. So was working 3 jobs to keep you in decent clothes and good schools. Everything important is risky. He stared at me like I'd grown another head. This isn't the same thing, Mom. That was different. That was necessary. And this isn't necessary? What do you mean? Is it necessary for me to feel useful? To have a purpose? To do work that makes me proud instead of just paying bills? Michael looked uncomfortable. Of course, but what? But you can't just change everything. What if you fail? What if you can't pay rent? What if something happens to you and you need help? The subtext was clear. What if you're not available when we need you? What if you become a burden instead of a resource? Then I'll figure it out, I said. The same way I figured it out when your father died. The same way I figured out how to pay for your college when the first scholarship fell through. The same way I figured out everything else for 30 years. He left that night frustrated and confused, and I knew he'd called Sarah as soon as he got home. They were probably discussing my mental state, wondering if I needed intervention or therapy or some kind of professional help. Because a 72-year-old woman deciding she mattered was clearly a sign of instability. 2 days later, Sarah arrived at my apartment with coffee and pastries from an expensive bakery in Manhattan. A peace offering, but also a not-so-subtle message. See how much better the professionals do it? I brought breakfast, she announced, setting the fancy paper bags on my kitchen table. We ate in uncomfortable silence. The pastries were beautiful, perfectly golden, artfully shaped, probably delicious. But they were also cold and impersonal, mass-produced in a kitchen where no one knew or cared who would eat them. Mom, Sarah said finally, Michael and I are worried about you. Why? Because you're acting different. Quitting your job, starting this baking thing, saying no when we ask for help. It's not like you. Maybe that's the problem, I said. What do you mean? Maybe being like me hasn't worked out so well. She looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? You're a great mom. You've always been there for us. Have I? Or have I just been available? The distinction seemed to escape her entirely. In her mind, they were the same thing. Look, she said, leaning forward with the expression she used when explaining something obvious to a slow colleague, I understand you want a hobby. That's great. But you can't just abandon your responsibilities. What responsibilities? Well, you know. Being here when we need you. Helping out when things get tough. When was the last time you needed me for something that wasn't about money or free labor? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I could see her mental wheels turning, trying to come up with an example. That's not fair, she said finally. We appreciate everything you do. Do you? Or do you just expect it? The conversation deteriorated from there. Sarah accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. I accused her of treating me like hired help instead of family. She left angry, and I spent the rest of the day wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. But that doubt lasted only until the next morning, when I woke up and realized I felt lighter than I had in years. My back didn't hurt from scrubbing floors. My hands weren't cracked from cleaning chemicals. And when I started my bread routine, I was baking because I wanted to, not because I was trying to earn someone's love. Maria knocked on my door that afternoon, holding a plate covered with a dish towel. "I made extra empanadas," she said. "Thought you might like some." We sat in my kitchen, eating her empanadas and drinking my coffee, and she asked about my week. Not because she needed something from me, but because she was interested in me as a person. When I told her about the conversations with Sarah and Michael, she nodded thoughtfully. "Change is hard for families," she said. "When one person decides to grow, it forces everyone else to examine themselves. They don't always like what they see." "What if I'm wrong?" I asked. "What if I'm being selfish? Eleanor, in the 20 years I've known you by sight in this neighborhood, have you ever once seen you do something just for yourself?" I thought about it. "I don't think so." "Then maybe a little selfishness is long overdue." She was right. I had spent so many years defining myself by what I could give others that I had forgotten what it felt like to receive. Not just things, but attention, respect, genuine care. The farmer's market became my sanctuary. Every Saturday, I set up my little booth between Maria's friend who sold vegetables and a young man who made soap from goat's milk. My customers were diverse families, young couples, elderly people like myself who still appreciated things made by hand with care. Mrs. Chen, who bought my almond cookies every week, told me they reminded her of her grandmother's baking. A teenage boy named Marcus always chose my chocolate muffins and said they were better than the ones at Starbucks. These people didn't know about my family drama or my financial struggles. They just knew that I made something they enjoyed, and they were grateful for it. For the first time in years, I felt competent and valued for my skills rather than my availability. But growth is rarely a straight line, and my family wasn't ready to accept the new version of me. The confrontation I'd been dreading came in November, when Sarah invited me to Thanksgiving dinner at her apartment. It was the first time in months that we'd spoken more than briefly, and I hoped it might be a chance to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. I arrived at her Chelsea apartment with a homemade pumpkin pie, not because I was expected to bring something, but because I wanted to share something I'd made. Sarah answered the door wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. "Hi, Mom," she said, kissing my cheek with the enthusiasm of someone greeting a distant acquaintance. Her apartment was full of people I didn't recognize, colleagues from work, friends from her expensive gym, neighbors from her building. I knew immediately that I didn't belong. Not because of my clothes, though my best dress was clearly from a different economic bracket, but because of the way conversations stopped when I entered the room. The polite smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. The careful questions about how I was keeping busy in retirement. Michael was there with his girlfriend du jour, a very young woman named Crystal who worked as a bartender and seemed nice enough but completely uninterested in anyone over 30. He greeted me with a hug and a joke about how I was looking relaxed, which I interpreted as code for lazy now that you're not working constantly. Dinner was catered from an upscale restaurant, everything perfectly prepared and beautifully presented. My pumpkin pie sat on the counter next to the professional desserts like a child's art project displayed next to museum pieces. The conversation flowed around me without including me. Work stories I couldn't relate to, references to restaurants I'd never been to, complaints about problems I would have killed to have. When someone asked what I was up to these days, Sarah answered for me before I could speak. "Mom's been experimenting with baking," she said with a slight laugh. "She's become quite the entrepreneur." The way she said entrepreneur made it clear she found the whole thing amusing. Like watching a pet perform tricks. "How wonderful," said a woman named Jennifer who worked in Sarah's department. "My mother took up painting after she retired. It's so important for seniors to have activities." Activities. Like I was a nursing home resident being kept busy with crafts. "It's not a hobby," I said quietly. "It's a business." "Of course it is," Jennifer agreed with the kind of patronizing enthusiasm usually reserved for children. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but really I needed a moment away from the suffocating politeness. In Sarah's hallway, surrounded by framed photographs of her achievements, college graduation, work awards, vacations and places I'd never see, I felt smaller than I had in months. When I returned to the living room, the conversation had moved on to holiday plans. Crystal was talking about visiting her family in California, and Jennifer was describing a ski trip to Colorado. When the attention turned to me, Sarah spoke up again. Mom will probably be busy with her baking, she said. She's become very focused on that lately. Will you be selling Christmas cookies? Crystal asked brightly. I might, I said. That's so cute, she exclaimed. Like a little cookie lady. The phrase hit me like a slap. A little cookie lady. Not a businesswoman, not an entrepreneur, not even a baker. A little cookie lady, like something out of a fairy tale. Harmless, quaint, and ultimately irrelevant. I left early, claiming fatigue, and Sarah didn't try to talk me out of going. She walked me to the door with the same polite smile she'd worn all evening. Thanks for coming, Mom, she said. And thanks for the pie. We'll have it later. I knew the pie would end up in the trash, untouched. On the subway ride home, I stared at my reflection in the dark window and wondered if I was deluding myself. Was I really building something meaningful, or was I just a sad old woman playing pretend? Was my little farmer's market booth actually a business, or just an expensive hobby that would eventually drain what little savings I had left? But when I got home and walked into my kitchen, my real kitchen, where I created things with my own hands and fed people who appreciated what I made, I remembered why I'd started this journey. Not because I wanted to prove anything to anyone, but because I needed to remember who I was beyond being someone's mother or someone's employee. I was Eleanor Martinez, and I made beautiful things that brought people joy. That was enough. That had to be enough. The holidays passed quietly. Sarah and Michael both called on Christmas Day, dutiful children checking the box marked, "Call Mom." The conversations were brief and surface level, catching up on nothing important. They didn't ask about my business, and I didn't volunteer information about how well it was doing. Because it was doing well. My Christmas cookie orders had been more than I could handle alone, and I'd had to recruit Maria to help me fulfill them all. January brought new challenges and new opportunities. A local coffee shop owner named David approached me at the farmer's market, interested in carrying my baked goods in his store. It was a small place in Fort Greene, not fancy but well established, with regular customers who appreciated quality. I've been watching your booth for months, he said. My customers are always asking where they can buy your stuff during the week. We worked out a deal where I would supply his shop with fresh items 3 times a week. It wasn't a huge contract, but it was steady income and a chance to expand beyond the weekend market. For the first time since Robert died, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. The success of my small business didn't go unnoticed. Word travels fast in Brooklyn Heights, and apparently several of my former cleaning clients had seen me at the farmer's market. Mrs. Patterson, whose apartment I'd cleaned for 8 years, stopped by my booth one Saturday in February. Eleanor, she said, I had no idea you were such a talented baker. These scones are extraordinary. She bought 24 items and asked for my business card. I didn't have business cards yet, but I made a mental note to order some. If I was going to do this, I needed to do it properly. You know, Mrs. Patterson continued, I'm having a dinner party next week. Would you be interested in providing dessert? I'd pay you, of course. It was my first catering job, just dessert for 12 people, but it felt monumental. I spent a week planning the menu, testing recipes, making sure everything would be perfect. The dinner party was a success, and 3 of Mrs. Patterson's guests asked for my contact information. Word of mouth is the best advertising, and my little business began to grow organically. I wasn't getting rich, I was barely breaking even most weeks, but I was supporting myself doing work that made me proud. More importantly, I was meeting people who saw me as valuable. David, the coffee shop owner, consulted with me about seasonal menu changes. Mrs. Patterson recommended me to her book club for their monthly meetings. Marcus, the teenager who bought my chocolate muffins, brought his grandmother to meet me because, he said, she makes stuff like you do, with love in it. These relationships were different from what I'd known with my own family. They were based on mutual respect and appreciation rather than obligation and guilt. People sought me out because they wanted to spend time with me, not because they needed something from me. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came an unexpected phone call from Sarah. Her voice was different, tighter, more controlled than usual. Mom, we need to talk, she said. About what? About this business thing you're doing. People are talking. What people? Mrs. Patterson mentioned to someone at the club that she hired you to cater her dinner party. It's embarrassing. I was quiet for a moment, trying to understand why my success would embarrass her. Embarrassing how? Mom, these are people I work with. They know you used to clean houses, and now you're selling cookies. It looks desperate. The words hit me like cold water. I had thought she might be proud of what I'd accomplished. Instead, she was ashamed of it. I'm not desperate, I said. I'm building something. You're 73 years old. You should be retired, relaxing, maybe taking up golf or something. Not hustling at farmers markets like you're 25 and broke. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but the core of it never changed. Sarah was embarrassed by my visibility. When I had been quietly cleaning other people's homes, invisible and unremarkable, that was acceptable. But now that I was out in public, representing myself as a businesswoman, taking pride in my work and my success, I had become a source of shame for her. "I need you to stop," she said finally. "Stop what?" "Stop this whole thing. The market, the catering, all of it. It's not appropriate for someone your age." "And if I don't?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Then I think we need to reassess our relationship," she said finally. There it was. The ultimatum I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Choose between my newfound independence and my daughter's approval. Go back to being small and invisible, or lose her entirely. "I need to think about that," I said. "What's to think about? I'm your daughter." "Yes," I said. "You are. And I'm your mother. Not your employee." I hung up before she could respond, and then I sat in my kitchen shaking. Not from fear, exactly, but from the magnitude of what had just happened. After 73 years of prioritizing other people's comfort over my own needs, I had just chosen myself. The phone rang almost immediately. It was Michael. "Mom, Sarah just called me." "What's going on? Did she tell you what she asked me to do?" "She said you guys had a disagreement about your baking thing. She asked me to stop my business because it embarrasses her." There was a pause. "Well, maybe she has a point. I mean, you are getting pretty old for all this running around." "I'm getting old for running around, but not for scrubbing floors?" "That's different. That was work. This is work too." "But Mom, think about it realistically. How long can you keep this up? What happens when you can't lift heavy pans anymore, or when your eyesight gets worse? Wouldn't it be better to just settle down?" "Settle down. Code for, give up and go back to being available whenever we need you." "What would I settle down to?" I asked. "I don't know. Normal retirement stuff. Reading books, watching TV, maybe volunteering somewhere." "You mean being useful but unpaid and invisible?" "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" Michael sighed. "Look, Mom, I just don't want you to get hurt. This business thing is risky. What if it fails? What if you lose money? What if you get in over your head?" What struck me about both conversations was what neither of my children asked: what if it succeeds? What if I'm happy? What if this gives my life meaning and purpose? They were so invested in protecting me from potential failure that they couldn't see the actual success I was already having. Or maybe they could see it, and that's what scared them. That evening, Maria came over with a bottle of wine and a listening ear. I told her about the calls, about the ultimatum, about feeling torn between the family I'd always wanted and the life I was finally building. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to keep my business and have my children love me for who I am instead of what I can do for them." "And if you can't have both?" I thought about it for a long time. "Then I choose myself." Saying those words out loud felt revolutionary. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself. The weeks that followed were difficult but clarifying. Sarah didn't call, and when I called her, the conversations were stilted and brief. Michael was caught in the middle, trying to mediate between us but clearly wishing the whole thing would just go away. Neither of them asked about my business or showed any interest in what was becoming the most fulfilling work of my life. But the business itself continued to grow. David increased his weekly orders, and I picked up 2 more regular customers: a yoga studio that wanted healthy muffins and a small restaurant that featured my desserts on their weekend menu. I hired Maria part-time to help with the increased demand, and we worked together in my kitchen like a well-oiled team. More than the money, though, it was the relationships that sustained me. My customers weren't just buying baked goods, they were buying into my story, supporting my dream. When Mrs. Chen's granddaughter graduated from high school, she ordered a custom cake from me because, she said, "Grandma says you put love in everything you make." When Marcus got accepted to college, his grandmother brought me flowers to thank me for being so kind to him over the months he'd been coming to my booth. These people didn't know about my family troubles, but they knew that I showed up every week with fresh, beautiful food made with care. They valued consistency, quality, and the personal touch that comes from someone who genuinely cares about their work. Summer brought another breakthrough. A food blogger who specialized in local businesses wrote a review of my offerings at David's coffee shop. She called my croissants transcendent and my chocolate chip cookies the platonic ideal of what a cookie should be. The review was shared on social media, and suddenly I had customers coming from Manhattan just to try my baking. I was featured in a small local newspaper as Entrepreneur of the Month, with a photo of me in my apron, smiling confidently in front of my display case at the farmer's market. The article talked about my late-in-life career change and called me an inspiration to anyone who thinks it's too late to pursue their dreams. When the article came out, I bought 5 copies and mailed one to Sarah and one to Michael. I didn't include a note. I just wanted them to see that other people found my work valuable and newsworthy. Neither of them called to acknowledge receiving it. But Mrs. Patterson did. And David did. And Maria did, along with half a dozen regular customers who had seen the article and wanted to congratulate me. They were proud of me in a way my own children couldn't seem to be. Fall arrived with new challenges. A chain bakery opened 3 blocks from David's coffee shop, offering mass-produced versions of many of the items I made. Their prices were lower, their marketing was slicker, and they had the resources to undercut small businesses like mine. For a few weeks, I worried that I would lose everything I'd built. My sales dipped, and I had to reduce Maria's hours. I lay awake at night wondering if Sarah had been right, if I was too old and foolish to compete in a real market. But then something unexpected happened. My regular customers started going out of their way to support my business. They brought friends to the farmer's market specifically to buy from me. They posted photos of my baked goods on social media with captions about supporting local businesses. David arranged for me to do a special event at his coffee shop, featuring seasonal items he couldn't get anywhere else. The difference, David explained, is that people can get a croissant anywhere. But they can only get Eleanor's croissants from you. He was right. What I was selling wasn't just baked goods, it was a relationship. A story. A connection to someone who cared about quality and took pride in her work. The chain bakery was still there, and it probably always would be. But I had something they couldn't replicate: authenticity. As the first anniversary of my decision to quit cleaning houses approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. I was making about the same amount of money I had been before, but I was infinitely happier. I woke up excited to start work instead of dreading it. I went to bed tired but satisfied instead of exhausted and empty. Most importantly, I had rediscovered who I was beyond being someone's mother or employee. I was a baker, a businesswoman, a valued member of my community. I had opinions about ingredients and techniques. I had relationships based on mutual respect. I had something to contribute to the world that was uniquely mine. But the success came with its own kind of loneliness. I wanted to share these victories with Sarah and Michael, wanted them to be proud of what I'd accomplished. Instead, there was a growing distance between us that felt almost impossible to bridge. The breaking point came in December, almost a year after our Thanksgiving confrontation. I was delivering an order to a holiday party in Sarah's neighborhood when I saw her coming out of a restaurant with a group of friends. She was laughing, animated, looking beautiful and successful and completely content. When she saw me carrying my delivery bags, her expression changed. Not to happiness or even surprise, but to something that looked like horror. She glanced around to see if her friends had noticed me, then started walking in the opposite direction. I stood on that sidewalk, watching my daughter pretend I didn't exist, and felt something break inside me that I didn't think could break anymore. It wasn't anger, exactly, or even sadness. It was clarity. She wasn't embarrassed by my business. She was embarrassed by me. By the fact that I was visible, present, taking up space in the world instead of staying quietly in the background where I belonged. That night, I called Michael. "I saw Sarah today," I said. "Yeah? How is she?" She pretended not to see me. There was a long pause. "Mom, I'm sure she just didn't notice." She noticed. She looked right at me and walked away. Maybe she was in a hurry, or, Michael, stop making excuses for her. And stop making excuses for yourself. What do you mean? When was the last time you asked how I was doing? Really asked, not just as a greeting. We talk all the time. We talk when you need something. When was the last time you called just to chat? When was the last time you showed any interest in my life beyond whether I'm available to help you? The silence stretched long enough that I could hear him breathing. "I care about you, Mom. Do you? Or do you care about having access to me when it's convenient? That's not fair. Isn't it? You and Sarah have spent the last year trying to convince me that pursuing my own happiness is selfish and inappropriate. Why? Because it makes me less available to you. Because it means I have priorities other than your needs. Mom, that's not. Let me ask you something. Are you proud of me? What? Are you proud of what I've accomplished this year? Building a business from nothing, supporting myself, creating work that brings people joy." The pause was answer enough, but he tried anyway. "Of course I'm proud of you, but there shouldn't be a but, Michael. Either you're proud of me or you're not." "It's complicated." "No, it's not. It's actually very simple. You're either happy that your mother is happy, or you're not. I hung up before he could respond, and this time I didn't feel guilty about it. The holidays were the loneliest I'd experienced since Robert died, but they were also the most peaceful. I didn't wait for calls that wouldn't come or hope for invitations that wouldn't arrive. Instead, I focused on my work and my friends, the chosen family I'd built from customers and neighbors and people who appreciated what I brought to their lives. Maria invited me to her family's Christmas celebration, where I was welcomed with genuine warmth and introduced as my dear friend Eleanor, the most talented baker in Brooklyn. Her great-nephew was there with his new baby, and I was honored to hold the little boy who would grow up wrapped in the blue blanket she'd been knitting when we first met. David closed his coffee shop on Christmas Eve, but he invited me to join him and his partner for dinner. We cooked together, three people with no blood relation who had become family through choice and affection rather than obligation. These were the relationships I had been missing without knowing it. People who celebrated my successes instead of minimizing them, who supported my dreams instead of discouraging them, who valued me for who I was instead of what I could provide. Spring brought new opportunities and new challenges. A boutique hotel in Manhattan approached me about providing pastries for their continental breakfast service. It would mean drastically scaling up my operation, possibly renting commercial kitchen space, hiring employees. It was exciting and terrifying in equal measure. As I considered the offer, I found myself thinking about risk in a different way. For most of my life, I had been terrified of taking risks that might affect other people. When Sarah and Michael were young, every decision was filtered through the question of how it would impact them. Even after they became adults, I continued to prioritize their stability over my own growth. But now I was 74 years old, and I had to ask myself, what was I waiting for? Permission from children who had made it clear they preferred me invisible and available? A guarantee that I wouldn't fail? I accepted the hotel contract. The months that followed were the busiest and most challenging of my life. I rented space in a commercial kitchen in Queens, hired 2 part-time assistants, and learned to manage inventory and delivery schedules on a scale I'd never imagined. There were mornings when I arrived at 4 a.m. to start prep work, and evenings when I fell into bed exhausted but exhilarated. My little business had become a real business, with employees and contracts and responsibilities beyond my own survival. I was contributing to other people's livelihoods, providing jobs for Maria and 2 young women who needed flexible work while finishing their culinary degrees. The success was visible in ways that couldn't be ignored. My name was on delivery trucks. My products were served in establishments where Sarah's colleagues probably ate breakfast during business trips. Local food magazines started including me in articles about Brooklyn's artisan food scene. And through it all, my children remained conspicuously absent from my life. The final confrontation I'd been avoiding came on a hot July afternoon, exactly 2 years after that first day when Sarah had walked past me on the sidewalk. She arrived at my apartment unannounced, letting herself in with the key I'd never asked her to return. I was in my kitchen, which had been transformed into a proper workspace with industrial equipment and organized storage systems. I was testing a new recipe for the hotel contract, focused and content in my element. "Mom, we need to talk," Sarah said from my doorway. I looked up from my mixing bowl, flour dusting my apron, and felt a familiar mix of hope and wariness. It had been months since we'd spoken beyond brief, polite exchanges. About what? About this. She gestured around my kitchen. About what you've turned your life into. I've turned my life into something meaningful. You've turned your life into a circus. The words hung between us like a challenge. I set down my whisk and really looked at her for the first time in years. She was impeccably dressed as always, her makeup perfect despite the heat, her posture radiating the kind of professional confidence I'd never possessed at her age. "Why are you here, Sarah?" "Because people are talking. Because Mrs. Patterson's daughter works in my building and she mentioned seeing articles about Eleanor Martinez, Brooklyn's cookie lady, and everyone started asking if that was my mother. And that's a problem because it is. Because I've worked hard to build a reputation in this industry, and I can't have people thinking my family is eccentric. Eccentric. That was a new one. So you want me to stop being successful because it's inconvenient for your image? I want you to stop making a spectacle of yourself." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Making a spectacle. As if being visible, being proud of my work, being publicly successful was somehow unseemly for a woman my age. "What would you prefer I do?" "I don't know. Normal grandmother things." "I'm not a grandmother." "You could be, if you stopped focusing on this business obsession and started acting like a normal person." "Whose fault is it that I'm not a grandmother?" The question seemed to surprise her. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're 38 years old and have never shown any interest in having children. Michael is 32 and has never had a relationship that lasted longer than 6 months. So whose fault is it that I don't have grandchildren to occupy my time? That's not the point. Isn't it? You want me to be a normal grandmother, but you haven't given me any grandchildren. You want me to be available when you need me, but you only need me for money or services. You want me to be proud of my family, but you're ashamed of me. What exactly do you want from me, Sarah? She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her struggling to formulate an answer that didn't sound as selfish as the truth. I want you to be my mom, she said finally. I am your mom. I've always been your mom. But I'm also a person with my own needs and dreams and value beyond what I can provide for you. This isn't about that. Yes, it is. It's exactly about that. For 40 years, I defined myself entirely by my relationship to other people. I was Robert's wife, then I was your and Michael's mother, then I was the cleaning lady who showed up and did what needed to be done without causing problems. I was never just Eleanor. And now you have to be Eleanor the entrepreneur? Eleanor the success story? Eleanor the inspiration? I have to be Eleanor the person who matters. Eleanor who has value. Eleanor who deserves respect. The word respect seemed to hit her wrong. Her expression hardened. Respect? You want respect for selling cookies? I want respect for building something from nothing. For supporting myself. For creating work that brings people joy. For refusing to be invisible anymore. You were never invisible. I was to you. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I could see that it had landed. Sarah's perfectly composed expression cracked slightly. That's not true. When was the last time you asked about my dreams, Sarah? When was the last time you showed interest in what makes me happy? When was the last time you saw me as a complete person instead of just your mother? That's not. You walked right past me on the street. Your own mother, and you pretended I didn't exist because you were embarrassed to be seen with me. I was busy. You were ashamed. And you know what? I'm done being ashamed of myself to make you comfortable. I untied my apron and set it on the counter, giving myself a moment to collect my thoughts. This conversation had been years in the making, and I wanted to get it right. I have spent 50 years of my life putting other people's needs before my own, I said. I worked jobs I hated to pay for things you wanted. I sacrificed my social life, my hobbies, my dreams, my health, everything, to make sure you and Michael had every advantage I could give you. I never asked for gratitude, but I also never expected contempt. I'm not contemptuous, yes, you are. You're contemptuous of my success because it doesn't fit your vision of who I'm supposed to be. You're contemptuous of my independence because it makes me less controllable. You're contemptuous of my happiness because it forces you to confront how little you've contributed to it. Sarah's face was flushed now, her professional composure completely gone. Fine, she said. You want to know the truth? Yes, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that my 74-year-old mother is running around Brooklyn trying to be some kind of business mogul instead of acting her age. I'm embarrassed that people I work with know my mother as the cookie lady. I'm embarrassed that you quit being normal to chase some fantasy about being important. There it is, I said quietly. There's what? The truth. You're not worried about my well-being or my financial security or my health. You're worried about how my choices reflect on you. Is that so wrong? I've worked hard to build a career, to establish myself professionally. I shouldn't have to explain why my mother is selling baked goods at farmers markets. You don't have to explain anything. You could just say, my mother started a successful business after she retired. You could be proud of me. You could support me. But that would require seeing me as a person instead of an extension of yourself. Sarah grabbed her purse and headed toward the door, then turned back. You want to know what I think, she said. I think you're having some kind of breakdown. I think Dad dying broke something in you that never healed right, and now you're acting out because you can't handle being alone. The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. But they also confirmed everything I'd suspected about how she saw me. Maybe, I said. Or maybe your father dying taught me that life is short and uncertain, and I don't want to waste what's left of mine being someone I don't recognize. She left without saying goodbye, and I knew she wouldn't be back. Michael called that evening, no doubt summoned by Sarah to talk sense into me. Mom, Sarah told me you guys had another fight. We had a conversation. She didn't like what she heard. She's just worried about you. No, she's worried about herself. And so are you. That's not fair. Michael, let me ask you something. Are you calling because you're concerned about my well-being, or because Sarah told you to? I'm calling because I care about you. Okay. Then tell me about my business. Tell me what you know about what I've been doing for the past 2 years. Silence. You don't know anything about it, do you? You don't know that I have contracts with restaurants and hotels. You don't know that I employ 3 people. You don't know that I've been featured in newspapers and magazines. You don't know any of it because you've never asked. I know you're doing well. How do you know that? Because you seem happy. I am happy. For the first time in decades, I'm genuinely happy. And instead of celebrating that, both of you have spent 2 years trying to convince me to give it up. We just don't want you to get hurt. I've already been hurt, Michael. By you. By Sarah. By people who were supposed to love me unconditionally but who apparently only loved me when I was convenient and compliant. Mom, that's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time either of you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you included me in your plans without needing something from me? When was the last time you treated me like a person you actually wanted to spend time with? The questions hung in the air, unanswered because they were unanswerable. I love you, Mom. I know you do. But you love the version of me that existed for your convenience. You don't love the real me, because you've never taken the time to get to know her. That's not fair. Fair? Michael, I gave you everything I had for 30 years. I worked myself to exhaustion to pay for your education, your emergencies, your dreams. I never said no when you needed help. I never asked for anything in return except the chance to be part of your life. And for the past 2 years, you've made it clear that my happiness is less important to you than your comfort. If that's not unfair, what is? He was quiet for a long time. What do you want from us? He asked finally. I want you to be proud of me. I want you to be interested in my life. I want you to see me as a complete person instead of just your mother. I want you to call because you miss me, not because you need something. I want to matter to you beyond my usefulness. You do matter to us. Then prove it. Show up for me the way I showed up for you for 30 years. Be curious about my work. Celebrate my successes. Support my dreams instead of trying to sabotage them. We're not trying to sabotage, yes, you are. Every time you suggest I'm too old, too risky, too inappropriate, you're sabotaging my confidence and my happiness. Every time you imply that my business is a hobby or a phase or something I should be embarrassed about, you're sabotaging my success. I didn't realize that's how you felt. Because you never asked. The conversation ended without resolution, but with something that felt like understanding, at least on his part. Whether that understanding would translate into changed behavior remained to be seen. Over the following weeks, I waited to see if either of them would make an effort to bridge the gap we'd acknowledged. Sarah didn't call at all. Michael called once, but it was to ask if I could recommend a good cleaning service for his apartment, apparently without irony. I realized that I had been waiting my entire adult life for my children to see me clearly and love what they saw. I had shaped myself around their needs, their expectations, their comfort, hoping that somehow all that sacrifice would earn me a place in their lives that was secure and valued. But love can't be earned through service. Respect can't be purchased with sacrifice. And I had spent so many years trying to be worthy of their affection that I had forgotten to develop any affection for myself. Maria noticed the change in me during one of our afternoon coffee sessions. You look lighter, she said. I feel lighter. Like I've been carrying something heavy for years and finally set it down. What did you set down? The responsibility for other people's happiness. The need to be needed. The fear of disappointing people who were already disappointed in who I really am. She nodded knowingly. That's a heavy load. The heaviest. And the strangest part is, I thought I was being selfless all those years. I thought putting everyone else first made me a good person. But really, I was just being a coward. How so? I was afraid that if people saw the real me, if they knew I had opinions and dreams and needs of my own, they wouldn't want me around anymore. So I made myself indispensable by being invisible. And now? Now I'd rather be alone and authentic than surrounded by people who only tolerate the fake version of me. It was true. The loneliness of being estranged from Sarah and Michael was real and painful, but it was clean loneliness. It didn't have the desperate, clinging quality of the loneliness I'd felt when I was still trying to earn their love. This was the loneliness of someone who had chosen themselves over convenience, and there was a dignity in it that I'd never experienced before. As summer turned to fall, my business continued to flourish. The hotel contract led to 2 more similar accounts, and I was approached by a local event planner who wanted to feature my desserts at upscale weddings and corporate functions. I hired another part-time employee and started looking into expanding to a larger commercial space. More importantly, I had built a community of people who valued what I brought to their lives. David had become not just a business partner but a genuine friend who consulted with me on everything from menu planning to relationship advice. Mrs. Patterson and I had developed a warm friendship that extended far beyond our business relationship. Marcus, the young man who had been buying my muffins since I started, was now in college but still came to see me whenever he was home, bringing his girlfriend to meet his friend Eleanor who makes the best cookies in the city. These relationships were based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Nobody was using anyone else. Nobody was taking anything for granted. We all chose to be in each other's lives because we genuinely enjoyed it. On a crisp October morning, exactly 2 years after I'd quit my cleaning jobs, I was at my farmer's market booth arranging the day's offerings when I looked up to see a familiar figure approaching. It was Michael, looking uncertain and slightly nervous. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hello, Michael." He surveyed my setup, the professional display cases, the printed signs, the steady stream of customers who greeted me by name. "This is impressive," he said. "Thank you." We stood in awkward silence for a moment while I helped a regular customer choose between 2 types of scones. "I've been thinking about our last conversation," he said after the customer left. And I think I owe you an apology." I waited. "I've been so focused on protecting you from potential problems that I never paid attention to your actual successes. This is really something special." He gestured around the market, where vendors were calling out their wares and customers moved between stalls with the unhurried pleasure of people enjoying their Saturday morning. "I Googled you," he continued. "I found the newspaper articles, the reviews, the mentions in food blogs. I had no idea how well known you've become." "You never asked." "I know. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot of things." Mrs. Chen approached my booth, and I introduced her to Michael as my son. She immediately launched into praise of my almond cookies and asked if Michael had inherited my baking talents. The conversation was warm and natural, and I could see Michael's surprise at being treated like someone notable simply because he was related to me. After Mrs. Chen left with her weekly purchase, Michael turned back to me. "She clearly sees you as someone important," he said. "I am someone important. I always was. I just forgot for a while." "I helped you forget." "We both did." "Yes, you did." He was quiet for a moment, watching me arrange pastries and chat with customers. "What can I do to make it right?" It was the question I'd been waiting to hear for 2 years, but now that it had come, I realized I didn't have a simple answer. "I don't know," I said honestly. "This isn't something you can fix with an apology or a gesture. This is about fundamentally changing how you see me and how we relate to each other." "I want to try." "Do you? Or do you want things to go back to how they were before I started expecting more?" "I want to get to know you. The real you. Not just my mom, but Eleanor the person." It was a start. Not a guarantee, but a start. "Okay," I said. "But this isn't about going backward. I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago, and I'm not going back to being her. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on who I am now, not who I used to be." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because who I am now is someone with her own business, her own friends, her own priorities. Someone who won't drop everything when you call. Someone who expects to be treated with respect and consulted about decisions that affect her. Someone who has opinions and expresses them." "I understand," he repeated, and this time it sounded like he meant it. Over the following months, Michael made genuine efforts to rebuild our relationship on new terms. He visited my commercial kitchen and asked thoughtful questions about my processes and business model. He attended one of the events I catered and introduced me to people as my mother, Eleanor Martinez, who owns one of Brooklyn's most successful boutique bakeries. He called regularly, not when he needed something, but just to check in and hear about my week. Most importantly, he seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with me. We developed a routine of meeting for dinner once a week, and our conversations ranged from business challenges to family memories to current events. I discovered that he had thoughtful opinions about politics and art, that he was more sensitive than I'd realized, and that he had inherited some of Robert's dry sense of humor. It wasn't a complete transformation, old habits are hard to break, but it was progress. Real, measurable progress toward the kind of relationship I'd always wanted with him. Sarah was a different story. She didn't call, didn't visit, and seemed to have written me off entirely. Through Michael, I learned that she was dating someone seriously and had gotten a promotion at work, but she had apparently decided that having a mother who refused to be invisible was incompatible with her life goals. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But it was a clean hurt, the kind that comes from accepting reality rather than fighting it. Sarah had made her choice, and I had made mine. Maybe someday she would change her mind, but I couldn't live my life waiting for that possibility. The 3rd anniversary of my transformation passed quietly but meaningfully. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. My business was profitable enough that I could afford to hire a business manager and take actual vacations. I had traveled to Vermont to visit suppliers, to Maine to attend a food trade show, to California to see Maria's sister who had moved there decades earlier. These trips weren't about visiting family or fulfilling obligations. They were about exploring the world as an independent person with her own interests and curiosities. I was discovering parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. On a warm May evening, I was closing up my booth at the farmer's market when I noticed a young woman standing nearby, watching me with obvious nervousness. She was probably in her early 30s, professionally dressed but disheveled in the way that suggested a long day at an office job. "Excuse me," she said as I finished packing up my unsold items. "Are you Eleanor Martinez?" "I am. I'm sorry to bother you, but I read about you in that magazine article last month. About starting your business older in life." "Oh yes, that was a nice piece. I was wondering, could I ask you some questions? I'm thinking about making a big change in my own life, but I'm scared. Everyone keeps telling me I'm crazy, that it's too risky, that I should just be grateful for what I have." I looked at her carefully. She had the same desperate, trapped expression I recognized from my own mirror years ago. "What do you want to do?" "I want to quit my marketing job and become a photographer. I know it sounds ridiculous, I'm 33, I have student loans, everyone says I'd be throwing away a stable career. But I can't stand spending my life in meetings about products I don't care about, selling things to people who don't need them." "It doesn't sound ridiculous at all." "Really? Really? Life is too short to spend it being someone you're not." We talked for half an hour right there on the empty market street, with vendors closing their stalls around us and the sun setting over Brooklyn. I told her about my own fears, my family's resistance, the temptation to play it safe. I told her about the difference between earning money and building a life, between being useful and being valued. "The thing is," I said as we parted ways, "people will always have opinions about your choices. But you're the only one who has to live with the consequences of playing it safe. You're the only one who will lie awake at night wondering, what if?" She thanked me with tears in her eyes, and I watched her walk away feeling like I had come full circle. 3 years ago, I had been the one needing permission to change my life. Now I was the one giving it to someone else. Summer brought an unexpected phone call from Sarah. Her voice was different, less controlled, more uncertain. "Mom, I was wondering if we could meet for coffee." "Of course." We arranged to meet at a cafe in Park Slope, neutral territory for both of us. I arrived first and chose a table by the window, where I could watch people walking by with their Saturday morning energy. Sarah arrived 15 minutes late, which was unlike her. She looked tired, and her usually perfect appearance showed signs of stress. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I had to finish something for work." "On Saturday?" "Every day lately." We ordered our drinks and sat in uncomfortable silence until they arrived. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I've been thinking about our last conversation. About the things you said. And I think you might have been right about some of it." I waited for her to continue. "I got passed over for a promotion last month. They gave it to someone younger, someone who's willing to work 18-hour days and never say no to anything. Someone who doesn't have any other priorities." "I'm sorry." "Are you? Or do you think I'm getting what I deserve for prioritizing work over family?" The question was defensive, but underneath the defensiveness, I heard something that sounded like genuine pain. "I'm sorry," I repeated. "Being passed over for something you've worked toward is always painful." The thing is, I realized I've become the same kind of person I used to criticize. I work all the time. I don't have close relationships. I define myself entirely by my professional achievements. She stirred her latte absently. "And when I don't achieve what I'm working toward, I don't know who I am anymore." "What do you think you want to change?" "I don't know. Maybe I want to have a life outside work. Maybe I want to learn how to bake, like you do. Maybe I want to understand what it feels like to create something instead of just managing other people's creations." It was the first time she had ever expressed interest in anything I did, but I was cautious. Too many conversations had started promisingly and ended in disappointment. "What don't you want to change?" The question seemed to surprise her. "I don't want to give up everything I've worked for. I don't want to start over completely. I just want to expand, I guess. Add things to my life instead of replacing everything." We talked for 2 hours, longer than we had talked in years. Sarah told me about the loneliness of her success, the way work had consumed everything else in her life, the growing feeling that she was sleepwalking through her days. I told her about the difference between achievement and fulfillment, between being impressive and being happy. I told her about the joy of creating something with my hands, the satisfaction of building relationships based on mutual care rather than professional advancement. "Could you teach me?" she asked as we were getting ready to leave. "Teach you what?" "To bake. To make something real." It was a small request, but it felt enormous. For years, I had wanted Sarah to show interest in my work, to value what I had built. Now she was asking to learn from me, to let me guide her in something I had mastered. Yes, I said. I'd like that. We started the following weekend with something simple: chocolate chip cookies, the same recipe I had perfected when she and Michael were children. Sarah approached the task with her characteristic intensity, measuring ingredients precisely and asking detailed questions about technique. But as the afternoon progressed, I watched her relax in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. Her shoulders loosened, her face softened, and she actually laughed when flour ended up in her hair. "This is harder than it looks," she said, kneading dough that was still too sticky. "Most worthwhile things are." "Is that why you like it? The challenge?" "I like it because it's real. When I make bread, I'm creating something that will nourish people. When someone enjoys my cookies, it's not because of marketing or positioning or strategy. It's because I made something good with my own hands." She nodded thoughtfully. "At work, I spend so much time on presentations about products I've never actually used. I know all the target demographics and market positioning, but I have no idea if any of it actually makes anyone's life better." "Does that bother you?" "More and more lately." The cookies we made that day weren't perfect, but they were good. More importantly, we made them together, working side by side in comfortable collaboration for the first time in decades. As Sarah was preparing to leave, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I was wrong about your business. About calling it embarrassing and inappropriate. I was wrong. Thank you for saying that. I was scared," she continued. "When you started changing, when you became this confident, independent person, it forced me to look at my own life. And I didn't like what I saw." "What did you see?" "I saw someone who had worked so hard to become successful that she had forgotten how to be happy. Someone who had put so much energy into impressing strangers that she had alienated the people who actually cared about her. It was the most honest she had ever been with me, and I could see how difficult it was for her to admit." "You know," I said, "it's possible to be successful and happy. It's possible to care about your career and still have other priorities." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I'm doing now. I care deeply about my business, but it's not the only thing that defines me. I have work that fulfills me, relationships that sustain me, hobbies that bring me joy. I'm not just one thing. I want to learn how to be more than one thing." "Then you will." The relationship we built over the following year was different from anything we'd had before, but it was real in a way our previous interactions had never been. Sarah came to my apartment every few weeks for baking lessons, and our conversations gradually moved beyond food to deeper topics: relationships, values, the difference between success and satisfaction. She started dating less frantically, focusing on quality rather than quantity. She took up painting as a hobby, something she'd enjoyed in college but had abandoned as impractical. Most importantly, she began setting boundaries at work, protecting time for the relationships and activities that actually mattered to her. "I used to think having boundaries meant being weak," she told me during one of our baking sessions. "Like I wasn't committed enough if I wasn't willing to sacrifice everything for work. And now? Now I think boundaries are what make me effective. When I'm not exhausted and resentful all the time, I actually do better work." It was a lesson I wished I had learned decades earlier, but I was grateful she was learning it at 39 instead of 73. Michael's growth was different but equally meaningful. He had started attending therapy to work on what he called his conflict avoidance issues, and our conversations became more honest and direct. He told me about feeling caught between Sarah and me for years, about the pressure he felt to keep everyone happy, about his own struggles with commitment and intimacy. "I think I learned from watching you that love meant sacrificing everything for other people," he said during one of our weekly dinners. "And then I was terrified that anyone I got close to would expect that from me." "That's not what love means," I said. "I'm starting to figure that out. But it's hard to unlearn something that deep. The hardest things are often the most worthwhile." He had started seeing someone seriously, a woman named Rebecca who was a social worker and shared his interest in hiking and old movies. When he brought her to meet me, I could see immediately that this relationship was different from his previous pattern. They were comfortable with each other, supportive without being codependent, clearly building something together rather than just enjoying each other's company. "She's wonderful," I told him after Rebecca had gone home. "I think so too. I'm trying not to mess it up." "How would you mess it up?" "By expecting her to take care of me the way you took care of us. By assuming she'll sacrifice her needs for mine. And by being so afraid of asking too much that I don't ask for anything at all." It was perceptive self-awareness, and I was proud of him for developing it. As my 4th anniversary approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. My business was not just surviving but flourishing, I had achieved recognition in local food magazines, developed relationships with suppliers across the Northeast, and built a reputation based on quality and consistency. More importantly, I had created work that brought me joy every single day. My relationships with Sarah and Michael were deeper and more authentic than they had ever been. We weren't perfect, old patterns don't disappear overnight, but we were genuine with each other in ways we had never been before. And I had discovered parts of myself that had been buried for decades. I had opinions about ingredients and techniques, strong feelings about business ethics, firm boundaries about how I expected to be treated. I had interests beyond my family. I had taken up watercolor painting and joined a book club and become active in local food advocacy. Most surprisingly, I had found peace with the possibility of being alone. I no longer needed other people's approval to feel valuable, and I no longer feared their abandonment enough to sacrifice my authenticity for their comfort. On a crisp October morning, I was arranging flowers from Maria's garden on my kitchen table when my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a California area code. "Is this Eleanor Martinez?" the voice asked. "Yes, this is Eleanor. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I'm a producer for a morning television show. We've heard about your story, starting a business in your 70s, building something successful from nothing, and we'd love to feature you in a segment we're doing about people who have reinvented themselves later in life." I sat down heavily, trying to process what she was saying. "You want to feature me on television?" "Absolutely. Your story is exactly the kind of thing our viewers love, inspiring, authentic, proof that it's never too late to pursue your dreams." We talked for 20 minutes about logistics and timeline. The show would fly me to Los Angeles, put me up in a hotel, and film a segment about my business and my transformation. They wanted to focus on the courage it takes to change your life when everyone expects you to stay the same. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. For years ago, I had been invisible, taken for granted, convinced that my best years were behind me. Now I was being asked to share my story on national television as an example of what was possible. I called Sarah first. "Mom, that's amazing," she said when I told her about the call. "I'm so proud of you." The words I had waited decades to hear came easily now, and I knew she meant them. "Will you watch?" I asked. "Of course I'll watch. I'll probably record it and watch it 5 times. Michael was equally enthusiastic, and Maria insisted on throwing a small viewing party at her apartment when the show aired. But the most meaningful response came from David, my first business partner. "Eleanor," he said when I told him the news, "this is just the beginning. You've proven that age doesn't determine potential, that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Think about all the people who will see your story and realize they don't have to accept a life that doesn't fulfill them." He was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person who had been told they were too old, too set in their ways, too unrealistic to pursue their dreams. It was about everyone who had ever felt invisible, taken for granted, or convinced that their best years were behind them. The morning of the television filming, I stood in my hotel room in Los Angeles, looking at myself in the mirror. I was wearing a simple blue dress that brought out my eyes, and my gray hair was styled in a way that looked elegant rather than apologetic. But the biggest change wasn't in my appearance, it was in my posture, my expression, the way I took up space in the world. I looked like someone who mattered. Someone who had something valuable to contribute. Someone who deserved to be seen and heard. The interview itself was warm and engaging. The host asked about my transition from cleaning houses to running a business, about the challenges of starting over in my 70s, about the resistance I'd faced from people who thought I should act my age. "What would you say to someone who feels it's too late to change their life?" she asked. "I would say it's never too late to become who you were meant to be," I replied. Age gives us wisdom, experience, and clarity about what really matters. Those are advantages, not limitations. And what advice would you give to family members who are resistant to someone making a big life change? This was the question I had been hoping for. I would say that real love supports people's growth, even when it's inconvenient. If someone you care about has found something that makes them happy and fulfilled, your job isn't to protect them from potential failure. Your job is to celebrate their courage and support their success. The segment aired 2 weeks later, and the response was overwhelming. My email inbox filled with messages from people across the country who had seen the show and been inspired to pursue changes in their own lives. A 78-year-old woman from Oregon wrote to tell me she had finally enrolled in the art classes she'd been considering for years. A 65-year-old man from Florida said he was leaving his corporate job to open a woodworking shop. But the message that meant the most came from Sarah. "Mom," she wrote, "watching you on television, I realized something important. You weren't just changing your own life when you started your business. You are showing me what it looks like to live authentically, to pursue work that fulfills you, to refuse to be small for other people's comfort. I've been thinking about that a lot as I make decisions about my own career and priorities. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. As I write this, it's been 5 years since I stood on that Brooklyn stoop watching Sarah walk past me without acknowledgement. 5 years since I felt invisible and taken for granted. 5 years since I believed my best years were behind me. Today, I run a successful business that employs 6 people and serves customers throughout the New York area. I've been featured in food magazines and television shows, not as someone's mother or employee, but as Eleanor Martinez, baker and entrepreneur. More importantly, I have relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Sarah and I bake together every few weeks, and our conversations range from business challenges to relationship advice to family memories. Michael brings Rebecca to dinner once a month, and they've started talking about marriage and children. When that happens, I'll be a grandmother who models independence and self-respect rather than service and sacrifice. I have friends who value my company, interests that fulfill me, and work that brings me joy every day. I've traveled to places I'd never imagined seeing, learned skills I'd never thought I could master, and discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to start living authentically. That age is an advantage, not a limitation. That real love supports growth, not stagnation. That you don't have to choose between being valuable and being valued, you can be both. I wake up each morning excited about the day ahead, grateful for the work I do and the relationships I've built. I go to bed each night satisfied with how I've spent my time, proud of what I've accomplished, and optimistic about what tomorrow might bring. The pastries I make now are infused with something different than they were in those early, desperate years. They're not apologies or bribes or attempts to earn love. They're expressions of joy, celebrations of skill, gifts to people who appreciate what I create. And when customers tell me that my croissants brighten their morning or that my cookies reminded them of their childhood, I no longer need their gratitude to feel valuable. I already know I'm valuable, not because of what I provide for others, but because of who I am. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever wondered if it was too late to pursue the dreams you set aside? Have you ever questioned whether the people who claim to love you actually see you as a complete person? If any of this sounds familiar, I want you to know that it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand respect, pursue fulfillment, or refuse to be small for other people's comfort. The path isn't always easy, changing decades of patterns never is. But the alternative is spending whatever years you have left living someone else's vision of who you should be instead of discovering who you actually are. You deserve better than that. You deserve to be seen, valued, and celebrated for your authentic self. You deserve work that fulfills you, relationships that sustain you, and the deep satisfaction that comes from living according to your own values and dreams. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Every subscription helps me reach someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to start living authentically. Share this with someone who might be struggling to choose themselves, who might be feeling invisible or taken for granted. Your story matters. Your dreams matter. You matter. And it's never too late to start believing that.